Good morning, everyone. I'm William Tyree, CMO of Revenue.io. I'm here with my colleague Jake Spear, Director of Sales. We're here to talk about AI and sales automation, the challenges facing sales teams, the state of sales maturity in the market, the paradigm shifts taking place right now that teams need to know about to be competitive. Hey, Jake, how you doing?
Yeah, thanks, William. It's good to be here. AI is definitely having its impact here as it is with a lot of industries, so happy to be chatting about it.
So I think it's fair to say, Jake, that AI is in business news almost more than ever before, thanks partially to ChatGPT, which we will touch on later in this conversation. But I think depending on your point of view, it's either a time of great anxiety about AI or a time for great opportunity. What do you feel like you're seeing out there as you're talking with sales leaders in the market in terms of, which kind of end of spectrum they're on?
Yeah, as it relates to sales leaders, I mean, to me the anxiety is misplaced. There's a lot of fear among sales leaders or salespeople in general that their jobs will be gone, that AI will completely replace them very, very soon. I don't think that's the case. I think AI is really good at making the person more of who they are. It gives you more access to that person's abilities, more access to the way that they interact with customers, potential customers. And so to me, it's an enhancement. If that person is a poor sales rep, it might enhance them in the sense of making them better. It might make them more of themselves and make them worse. But if you can find ways to look at the good qualities and use AI to plug into those, I think it just turns our sales reps and sales leaders into better versions of themselves.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what we're seeing in terms of the impact of AI on sales automation. Let's take a couple moments here and look at the key challenges facing sales teams. So I should say that, this information is taken from the new AI and sales report available at revenue.io. So Jake, let's first look at the top two items here. Half of reps feel like they have too many tools, and yet they spend just 28% of their time selling. Almost any measure, that would be less time selling than any time in the past decade. So Jake, how is this possible despite all this automation?
I see it all the time. How is it possible? I'll give you a quick story, because to me this is highly relevant. I needed to buy recently. I have two kids, both under 3, and I needed to buy an infant bathtub. And I went to Amazon, king of automation, right? And there were 900,000 different bathtubs for me to buy, and I was at a loss. I couldn't possibly do it. Like I thought, I don't know how I should choose between any of these. I ended up walking into a Bye Bye Baby and came out with a bathtub because it distilled it down into 3 or 4 different options for me that I knew were sort of vetted by Bye Bye Baby, and that I could sort of make my decision. And so I think the same concept that applied to me there is what's happening in sales right now. There's this sort of analysis paralysis of, I have all these different tools that are supposed to make me better, all these things that are supposed to give me access to more, and I don't know where to start. Do I start using this tool to enhance this? Do I start using that tool for this? And then I spend so much time thinking of which one am I going to work on? I end up not doing anything or doing too much of the wrong thing.
Got it. So too many tools, too many choices, maybe too many places to look for the next thing to do. Is that about right?
100%. Yeah. And too many things to keep track of, right? Like having to learn and understand how to use all these tools. And some of them are highly complex because they do great things for buyers. But if you're using disparate systems, they all have their own way of doing things. You're going to be at a loss as a rep for which basket do I put more of my eggs into?
100%. Let's lightly touch on these next two things, and then we can look at some of the state of sales maturity in terms of what things are kind of those things that we've known for a little bit, and then future looking. So next is CSOs and CROs are under pressure to increase revenue with limited headcount. This seems like a little bit of a contradiction as well.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing in the news, record employment. Unemployment is very, very low, yet we're seeing tons of layoffs. And tech companies in particular are under pressure to do a lot more with limited hiring, right? Limited staff. So we're seeing more and more pressure on ramp time. So Jake, is ramp time, I know it's been a hot topic, at least for the last 2 or 3 years. Do you see this as something that is just only going to increase in terms of the pressure to get sellers onto the floor and productive faster and faster?
Yeah, I think this would be the case in most industries in that technology in many ways is cheaper than human capital, right? And so, especially in times like these for tech, you have these heads of sales or heads of revenue who it's really expensive and time consuming to ramp someone. It's expensive because you spend a lot of time in training. That person just has to get up to speed. So you have sort of revenue loss from them not being as up to speed as they should be. And so there has been a lot of focus, especially when folks are tightening the purse strings a little bit. There's been a lot of focus on how do we make sure that when we do hire reps, because it's such a large investment on behalf of the company, how do we make sure that we A, get the most out of them, but B, that we get the most out of them as soon as possible? And so we're seeing that constantly now more than ever. We used to see ramp times that we're not hearing anymore. We're hearing months and months shorter in terms of ramp times that are being relayed to us. So in this data you're showing here, William, average account executive ramp time being 4.5 months. While taking over 5, we're getting people telling us they need them ramped in 2, 3 even, to really feel like they're getting the investment that their ROI on their people.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the good news is there are a lot of ways that sales automation can help with that, right? And artificial intelligence can help with that. So it sounds to me like, we're able to solve that problem better than we could in the past. The last thing I'll touch upon here is forecasting. So it's interesting, speaking with somebody I think that you have a lot of experience with, Jake. Remember the book Predictable Revenue?
Oh yeah.
It's about 10 years since that book was put out. I would say, though, it's probably fair to say that instead of predictable revenue, what teams got out of that was predictable pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
It provided a very, very good framework for sales prospecting out there. Revenue continues to be a problem, though, when it comes to sales leaders under a lot of pressure from investors, from their CEO, to commit to a forecast for that quarter and really know what's going to close and not close. So really interesting that we're still seeing this big of a delta between, forecasting what's really hit and what's not hit, right? So would you agree with that statement?
In my experience, we are still relying predominantly on rep emotion and feeling about their deals,
right,
than we are on the data behind them. And we're starting to make those changes in a big way here internally, in that our data team now tracks so many different points within our opportunity life cycles that are helping to predict with a high level of accuracy what types of deals should be closing and when. But yeah, I would agree. The most folks I talk to, they go to the rep and they say, "What do you think? When will this close? Will it close?
That's right.
How will it close?" And that's their data. That's their one singular data point.
That's right. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think that it's great to have that data point, and we're all are at a time where you need the human check-in, right? That rep probably has a really great idea, no matter what they're seeing, like in the deal, in terms of what's their gut check on it, what's their experience, right? But now the good news is there's a lot more sales automation that can actually provide a counterbalance or another opinion on that. Let's kind of go ahead and get into where we're headed there in terms of maturity. So this chart, if you look at the columns on the left, the 2 columns, those are things that fair to say that most of those items are sales automation that's been around for a few years, that's been created primarily for sales development teams. In terms of technology, a lot of those things are like rule-based automation, if you will, right? The columns on the right-hand side are things that tend to be, not exclusively, but tend to be AI-enabled or AI-led automation, right? And so what's really exciting about this is that, whereas like all the tooling around this, or most of it was geared around sales development teams in the past, we're seeing a lot more tooling and AI-powered decision-making and things like that that can actually help your sales leader, that can actually help your AEs as we go along. So, Jake, why don't you maybe take a moment here? If you look at like those left columns in the beginning, right, under productivity, prioritization, insights, what things there are not listed that you feel like are also part of like core sales engagement today?
When I look at those left two columns, what I see a lot of is how do we get salespeople to do more?
Right.
But if you're just having them do more and you're not having them do what they're doing better, then you just get more crap, right?
Right.
And so to me, we spent a lot of time at first when we started with, creating all these tools for sales, and it was needed. We spent a lot of time focusing on how do we get more out of our team. That's great. But it's missing the fundamental piece, which is how do we make this person a better sales rep?
Right.
How do we make this person have a better, more substantial, qualified discovery meeting? That's what's missing from those left two columns.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more. As we go further and further to the right here, we get into things like conversation intelligence. We get into things like revenue enablement. And what we're seeing is that teams are finally starting to figure out, and it's taken a little bit, that things like conversation intelligence, teams are finally starting to wake up to the fact that we aren't just like automating a better way to listen to calls, right? Although that's great, right? But that's really, really baseline. I think what we're starting to see is that conversation data is good for a lot of other things. So everything that's rolled into conversation intelligence can be used for other things. What are some ways that your team and sales leaders that you know are starting to use conversation intelligence specifically to become better sellers?
The main way is about enabling reps in real time.
Right.
And the thinking behind that is we can always identify sort of areas in which we need to do better. But the time in which that coaching really sinks in is when we're actually doing it. And in the past, we've never really had the ability to do that, right? Like you kind of do that thing where you finish a call and you go, I should have done or said this. But if you actually had the coaching mid-call when that happened, not only are you saving that call potentially, but that's when it's really going to start clicking, because your mind then makes that connection right in the moment of, this is what I'm being coached on. This is what I was told I need to say or not say at this time. And that's where those connections start forming, and it starts getting into habit, as opposed to every time you do something, darn, right? I should have done that instead.
You also said something critical there, which is real time. And there's something else here. As if I look at one common word that's over there, it's guidance, right? So, when we looked at the big problems facing teams, a lot of them said, I have to learn too many tools. To me, implicit with these tools that are offering guidance is like, maybe there's not as much to learn, right? Is that true? Like, what does guided selling, for example, mean to you? If I'm a rep and I'm newly hired, I may be experienced, I might be inexperienced, but I'm newly hired and I'm trying to figure out, just tell me what to do next.
At the first company, when I was really a true salesperson, I was an SDR. I always admired and looked up to this one guy. He had been at the company for about 10 years, a little over 10 years. And one of the things that made him so good at his job was he knew the product like the back of his hand. He knew everything there was about the industry. He knew everything about the product. And it basically meant you couldn't stump the guy on anything you could ask him about why to use the product, how to use it, whatever. But the problem is most people don't have the benefit of having 10 years experience at one company, right? And so to me, what this guidance means is that you can essentially turn someone who's fairly new in an organization or even in an industry and make them sound like they're that guy who's been there for 10 years.
Right.
You can guide them with the same kind of talk tracks and phrasing and responses that person would use, the 10-year veteran would use, and that person only has 6 months experience.
Absolutely. That is an absolute great example of that. And I feel like that's absolutely true. And here, in these columns too, we're seeing things like, where a lot of teams have been at along those lines. It's about, okay, yeah, like help me recognize keywords and key phrases that are useful in terms of guidance along the way, right? But the great thing about AI enabled sales is that it's actually much more than that, right? It can detect sentiment, tone, voice energy, and actually, guide people to better performances in real time. And we'll actually get into how that contextual data is used in forecasting too in just a sec here. Let's get into our paradigm shifts real quick that are completely related to these sales maturity stages. So the first one here is 60% of sales teams will be using AI to augment human intelligence during discovery meetings and demos by 2026. So Jake, when we talk about augmenting human intelligence, right, it is using AI to make recommendations along the way. Like, can we talk about a couple examples of that? Like, how does this actually, this last mile, so to speak, of sales automation powered by AI, how's that working like in a real conversation, be it like a video chat or a phone call?
Well, for one, I feel very privileged that we are here at Revenue. We're part of that 60%, and it's not even 2026 yet, right? And how we're seeing that here, right? Sort of talking about it before with the example of that sort of 10-year veteran at my previous company.
Mm-hmm.
There are any number of things that we'll start with an experienced rep might need to know. Industry knowledge, like jargon, competitors, right? The types of regulations that may come up. Those are all things that if I'm new to a brand new industry, and we sell to all different types of industries here, that we can be and are loading into this sort of this augmented intelligence platform, and that we're helping our reps who maybe don't know as much about financial services or software or whatever that we're selling to. They have the ability now to know as much as possible in the middle of a phone call via pop-up windows as things are said or not said. There's other things such as compliance use cases, objections, where once you've been at a company for a while, you've sort of seen and heard it all in terms of why someone says they can't buy your product. But again, when you're new, those types of things, you haven't heard all those before. That's what we're sort of popping up in front of their face of, you hear this from a customer or prospect, say this in return. But at the same time, this is not just applicable to young and experienced folks. This is applicable to seasoned folks. And one example actually here is where we just saw this morning in our sales team meeting. We're trying to change the messaging that we use on our team for one of our core products. And when we ran the data on how much that messaging is being used, it's all the veterans who are still using the old messaging, right? They are stuck in their ways. They don't know, they don't want to change, right? And all the new people are saying it the correct way, right? Because they're new and they were just told this is what you're supposed to say. So now we can start using our own tool, Moments, internally to start reminding them, hey, this isn't the messaging anymore. This is the direction we're moving. And that's going to help shore up those more senior reps into new ways that the company's trying to sell or pitch the product, maybe new products that come out, new industry trends. So this really isn't just a new rep feature. This is something that all people can benefit from, because sales is hard, right? And
yeah,
that's what it comes down to. Sales is hard, and having someone or having something in your ear telling you, hey, you should try this, you should say this, don't say that next time. That's sort of the secret sauce to, winning big.
So not only is that a great example, but I think it's also indicative of where AI-enabled sales automation is going, right?
Yep.
So you talked about, like, the solution that you specifically talked about is your veterans on your team, right? You're not talking about it being a problem with the new people. It's like literally teaching the old dogs new tricks, right? And that is so important. And it's linked to numbers 2, 3, and 4 on here, right? Well, we talk about the next one. Opportunity activities will be informed by AI, not experience, right? So experience still comes into it, absolutely. Like you don't, we're always going to continue to try to hire our most experienced, most skilled sales reps, right? But this idea as well, though, that there's new concepts, new things coming in that your actually experience from time to time needs to be challenged. So one example of that, I would say, is through AI-enabled automation, we're able to actually push those reminders, right, for specific deal stages, because what may be appropriate to say in an early deal stage might not be the thing that you want to bring up at all when you're like on the 5-yard line, to create a football analogy. And the number 3 and 4 here are really, really closely aligned. So one is AI assisted engagement capabilities, right? So we're talking about an environment where there's a lot of budget pressure on teams. Operations teams are having to shrink the number of vendors. So instead of bringing in new vendors or sticking with ones that it's like, yeah, here's a bunch of stuff you got to learn. It's a bunch of things that you have to go around like in the store looking, for product where you have to look at for on demand. It's surfaced for you, right? It's these learnings that are coming for you. And then the last thing here is you mentioned earlier, Jake, that the only touch point that typically a sales leader has is the rep's gut instinct about how the deal is going, right? So what's really amazing is all that conversation data that's being accrued that we talked about before, it's actually being, repurposed and put into an AI predictive model. So yeah, you better be going out and asking your reps, what's the commit here? How can we help? How can the team rally around you? But the AI actually has an AI predictive model as well that can use conversation data, sentiment, other things like that as a counterbalance to say, okay, here's another way that the quarter could go, and maybe help reps understand the next best actions for those specific deals. Like you manage a team of reps, could something like that be helpful for you as you're trying to focus your reps on the things that they need to do next?
It's a good point. And what's important to know too, right, is that the rep gut instinct is actually a really important data point.
Yeah.
The message I was given earlier is it's not the only one.
Right.
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 And so what rep gut instinct is subject to is human error, which we all have, we all do. It's what is being human, right? And so what this allows us to do now is look at deals that a rep may have discounted before, saying, oh, they're not going to buy because of X, or I'm not putting as much time into it because of Y. And it has allowed me to surface old opportunities and say, hey, look, this one was actually, our model is predicting this to close within the next 2 months, but you haven't touched it in a quarter. Should we be revisiting this right now? Right. And that's oftentimes has opened up stale or lost opportunities, because our model is looking at all the data that it has, both from the gut instinct put into Salesforce by our reps, but also features from the calls themselves. And it's saying, maybe you should take another look at this. And usually the response I get from reps is, oh, yeah, I should.
That's right. Could not agree more. And with that, let's go to our last paradigm shift. We almost cannot have a webinar on AI and sales without mentioning ChatGPT. So up on the left here, you're seeing a lot of hyperbolic things like out there on LinkedIn and in the news media on like all the things that ChatGPT can do, right? So let's talk a little bit about what it is and what it isn't. And maybe I'll go first a little bit. I'll even talk to the marketing team, how the marketing team is using it. I know from using like this solution for hundreds of hours now that it's not a replacement even for a writer, right? But what it is it can turn you into the head writer. So in the past, things that might have taken a village to do, or you might say like, hey, I'm going to spin up 3 or 4 different meetings to get ideas on how to move this idea forward or get past my writer's block or something like that. This can actually be a really, really valuable assistant. So on the marketing team, we're actually using it to write everything from subject lines to, brainstorm ideas for webinars and things like that. You can ask it to be a contrarian. You can say, tell me all the reasons this thing won't work, right? And get a different point of view. So that stuff is very, very helpful. What we're finding though is it's really a productivity enhancer, but almost nothing that it would put out would be differentiated in the market. So you still really, really need humans to curate, to look at that. It's like a good first draft brainstorming type tool in many, many ways. Jake, what do you feel like the reception is in the sales community, and how do you think that some sellers are starting to use this?
The reception is, I think, like shock and awe and a little fear, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's still trying to figure out how best to use it. And in talking with other people who have tried it out and used it, that the general like consensus that I'm getting right now is it's somewhat lacks in creativity. And I think this is what you were saying, William, and that, I mean, in its nature, it's pulling from things that are already out there. And so if you're looking for something that's truly fresh and original, you're not getting it from GPT, excuse me. But if you are trying to scale something that you are already doing, have an idea for, you have the creative sort of thinking behind it, like all the other AI that we're seeing out there, it can be an enhancement to you, and it can make you a better you than you already are. But it's not all of a sudden, writing a brand new thing that no one's ever seen before. It's a amalgamation of everything else out there. It's like you had a team of 1 million researchers go and search everything and put something together for you in a matter of seconds, which is great. And I'm not trying to say Chat GPT is not an amazing tool in and of itself, but I think there still needs to be the human behind a lot of the asks for it to truly produce something special.
I agree with that. Basically, just like Google search 20 years ago or longer now, I really feel like the masters of this tool are going to be the most creative. The masters are going to be the people who put the best creative prompts in and actually know how to ask it to revise accordingly. And then you can get truly, truly creative with it. But the great thing, here's what I do know. If anybody out there has not tried it yet, is the end of writer's block. So if you are a seller and you need to create a bunch of, say, outbound emails or outbound talk tracks or whatever, no reason to kind of sit it around like beating your head against the piano for a while. Just start with the tool, and it'll probably be one of the best brainstorming, collaboration partners you've ever had. So
couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Well, Jake, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who's joining us here at the Rev Tech Summit.
Thanks, William. Happy to be here.
To learn more about the impact of AI-powered sales, you can download the report at revenue.io or reach out to me or Jake individually. Have a great one.